Hi, welcome to Chard Review. A retired supermodel spends a few days in a remote country home to find a new direction in her life. However, a series of strange occurrences in the house make her question reality. In the English countryside, retired supermodel Gabby and her manager Dan enter the latter's rest house situated by a river. The man answers a call regarding another client, Nina Lamont. Moments later, he tells the woman that he needs to head back to the city, but he'll try his best to return. Tomorrow, Gabby expresses that she doesn't want to be there alone, but the manager thinks spending a few days in the peaceful environment will do her good. While she checks her face using a compact mirror, he suggests she read the movie scripts he's chosen for her. Gabby tells him that there isn't a great history of models transitioning to acting, and Dan reminds her that he's told her several times before to make the change, but she refused. When she stands up and says she wants to go back to the city, he says he's only encouraging her, because he just wants what's best for his client. After he drives off, Gabby unpacks her things and arranges them in the closet. Then she places her toiletries in the bathroom before applying Joe Lang aftershave on her wrists. Suddenly, the creaking door startles her and she turns around in the living room. She picks up the scripts from the window and starts reading them on the couch while the woman takes a nap. The front door rattles as if someone is trying to open it from outside. Later, Gabby opens the door when she hears a knock. And JC? A delivery man hands her the groceries she ordered. The man says he's only doing deliveries as a part-time job since his dream is to become a fashion designer. When she realizes that JC recognizes her, the woman rudely shuts the door and the sheepish man drives off on his scooter in the bathroom. The former supermodel looks at the lines on her aging face and when she looks down, notices that her skincare products are in the trash can. At first she wonders how they got there, but chuckles when she realizes she must have knocked them over. Earlier that night, as she sleeps, she dreams of a person opening the bedroom door as she fearfully watches from the bed. The next morning, Dan asks Gabby how she found the script so far, and she says she can't really get into any of them. The woman says she's thinking about doing designer Max Baligan's show as her comeback, but the man disagrees and says walking the runway a month after announcing her retirement isn't the best move. He asks if the designer turned her down, and she says Baligan was busy when she called but believed. Dan asks if Gabby's happy living in his house, and she says yes, but adds that there is a strange feeling in the home. When he asked her to elaborate, she says she thinks she's being watched as if the house is alive. She thought she'd feel alone being there by herself, but realized that she doesn't. She thinks it might be a spirit to the man's bemusement. As the manager drives off, the former model returns to the living room, where she finds a note on a side table saying that spirits don't wear Joe Lang after shave. Frightened, Gabby runs after her friend's car to ask him why he thought it was amusing to leave her the note. However, when Dan reads the piece of paper, he thinks she is joking and notes how it's written in her handwriting. Confounded, the woman walks back to the house, but her worry increases when she finds another note reading "I am not your enemy." Alarmed, the woman runs out of the house to try and call the authorities, but it fails to connect. Later, she asks JC to check the house, but the delivery man doesn't find anything. Eventually, Dan returns to see if Gabby's all right, and JC tells him he checked all the rooms except the cellar, so the manager heads downstairs to see for himself and informs her that it's empty. Then the man says there's no other possible explanation for the notes except if she'd written them. Furious that he doesn't believe her, Gabby accuses Dan of keeping her in the house and having an accomplice behind the scenes to make her go insane just so he can get rid of her as a client. Exasperated, the manager says he'd never do anything to harm her and asks what she wants him to do that evening. Dan calls up Nina and tells her he's planning to stay with Gabby tonight to make sure she's okay and promises he won't sleep with her. Then the pair heads out for dinner and returns hours later, both clearly having had too much to drink. After playfully chasing her around the house, Dan kisses Gabby and they end up making love. However, in the middle of the deed, she says sleeping together wasn't a good idea. Later in bed, the woman says she knows he's been dating Nina Lamont, which is why he's been driving back to London every night. The man says he enjoys being with Nina, but that she isn't a good lover. Then he admits that whenever he isn't satisfied with his girlfriend, he hires a courtesan to fulfill his needs. Seconds later, the woman talks about her first love, Jamie, whom she met when she was a teenager. She says Jimmy, who had a skin condition, was her only friend in school. However, despite not finding him attractive, they made love. Gabby says that after they slept together, they spent the entire day on the beach, then he drove her home on his scooter, but on his way back got in an accident and perished. She says that ever since he died, she's felt like his spirit never left and continues to watch over her. Later that night the woman wakes up and realizes Dan left, so she starts packing her suitcase. Seconds later she lays back down in bed, but is startled when the bedroom door swings open and the chair moves on its own. Suddenly a man with manicured hands and a blonde egg crawls from behind the wardrobe and menacingly approaches her, causing Gabby to scream in fear. The next morning, she wakes and sees Dan putting his clothes on and wonders if the frightening ordeal was just a dream. Later, she tells her manager that she's changed her mind and decided to stay in the house. After the man leaves, she goes down to the cellar, where she finds an antique typewriter. Then she heads to the side table where she writes notes for the spirit, asking them if they can see her, if they're dead, and if she knows who they are moments later. She puts on makeup and wears a dress she once wore on the cover of a magazine. She asks the spirit if she's pretty because she still finds herself beautiful. However, instead of answering, the spirit, whom Gabby realizes is able to move things, rips her magazine and tosses it out the window. Immediately, the woman runs outside to retrieve it. In the living room, Gabby tells the spirit, whom she's convinced is Jimmy, that ever since he perished, she achieved all her goals as a model for him, but now that her glory years are behind her and because she doesn't think any of the scripts Dan gave her are any good, she believes she needs to do something innovative moving forward. The model says she needs to book the Balogun show and start there, but when she asks if Jamie can hear her, the spirit doesn't respond. That evening, Gabby watches Max Balogun's interview on TV and is surprised to learn that even though his show isn't for another month, he's hosting an event next week for a lucky few in advance. Irate, the former model, calls up the designer because he still hasn't called her. Back later, while she applies skin care in the bathroom, she happily tells Jimmy that Max agreed to meet her tomorrow. That night, the woman is awakened by the noise of JC's friend Mickey throwing stones at her bedroom window. The delivery man begs his friend to stop annoying the former model, but Mickey says talking to her might be his only chance at getting into the fashion industry. Eventually, she opens the door and lets the men in. In the living room, she sits on the couch suggestively and asks them to put music on. Mickey approaches the woman and kisses her neck when he touches her body. She stops him and gently pushes his hand away. Gabby asks what they're doing there, and Mickey says they're there because JC wants to form connections in the fashion industry. However, the woman knows they just want to sleep with a supermodel, and Mickey doesn't disagree. The arrogant man tells his meek friend to leave so he and Gabby can be alone. After he leaves, Mickey begins kissing the former model. She calls out for Jimmy, but the man continues his unwanted advances on the resisting woman. The man pins her down on the couch, slaps her, and tells her to do as he says. The frightened woman can do nothing but cry and convince herself that it's just a nightmare. Suddenly, an invisible being pulls Mickey off her and throws him to the floor. The confused man throws wild punches at the air, but the spirit lands clean, hits to the man's face. Then the entity pins him on a table before pulling down his pants and violating him. Soon the traumatized Mickey stumbles back outside and cries against a wall the next day. After Gabby takes a stroll by the river, she returns to the house to inform Jimmy that they need to be ready for when the taxi arrives to take them to the meeting with Ball again. Minutes later, she tries to blow cigarette smoke in front of her to possibly make the spirit visible. The entity blows back the smoke toward her, prompting the woman to reach her hands out to touch him. However, the spirit backs away and the woman asks Jimmy why he doesn't want her to touch him. After she believes she's convinced her friend to come with her to the meeting, she says she'll pour him a cup of freshly prepared. When she searches the cupboard for a mug, the spirit takes the coffee pot and throws the scalding liquid on the woman's face. Shocked and in pain, the woman falls to the floor holding her face. Hours later, the taxi driver knocks on the door. When the former model doesn't answer his call, the woman has placed bandages over the injuries on her face and also ignores dance calls. Then she heads down to the cellar and opens the wardrobe, where she finds dusty coats and the blonde wig she saw on the creepy man from her dream. At the bottom of the wardrobe, she spots a yellow box and finds several identical photographs of the man from the dream. Alarmed, she drops the box on the floor, but when she closes the wardrobe, she sees the man's reflection on the mirror. Gabby tries to escape, but the spirit pushes her back and knocks her onto a table. Then the entity proceeds to take advantage of the crying woman to disassociate from the harrowing experience. The woman imagines the first time she made love to Jimmy at the beach that evening. Returns to the house where he's shocked to find the bandages on Gabby's face. The crying woman tells him the man in the picture has been there the entire time. The manager asks where she found the picture, so she says she found it in the cellar. Dan heads downstairs to check, but finds the room empty. Moments later, he returns to the living room and tells Gabby that the man in the picture was a successful actor from 15 years ago, Michael Gigi's. He says he was a stage actor who became famous for portraying female characters and dressing like a woman. However, when he sees that the former model doesn't recognize the man, Dan says she was probably too young to remember the actor's career, took a nosedive 10 years ago and had to sell his properties, including the house which Dan bought. Eventually, the manager takes the bandages off Gabby's face so he can see the burns and tells her that they need to go to a hospital. Suddenly, the spirit bashes down on the head with a heavy object, then covers the screaming woman's mouth with his hand. Minutes later, Gabby regains consciousness and finds Michael Geiger. Sitting on a chair, he tells her to stay and talk to him, and explains that it takes all his energy just to remain visible. The creepy man says he knows she's telling herself that he abused her trust by pretending to be Jimmy, but callously reminds her that her friend's dead. Geiger says at this point he isn't sure whether he's still alive or if he's just an idea. The man continues that he has a story that resembles her own. Like her, he was also famous, and while he enjoyed the anonymity of retirement at first, he couldn't accept the reality of people forgetting who he is. He tells her to imagine if she had the power of invisibility and says she could affect people's lives and change their destinies. The woman sees a gold ring on his finger, but moments later sees the same ring now on the table. Gaga says he failed the test because it took him too long to realize that it was a blessing. He ended up doing bad things with his invisibility and shows evil. He caused pain and ruined people's lives with total impunity. When he felt nothing but disgust for the things he'd done, he withdrew from the world and hid in the house where he wrote scripts under a pseudonym. The man says that through his stories he was able to free himself from his demons without anyone having to suffer. Through his writing, he convinced himself that he'd gotten better and even managed to make himself visible again. However, Gabby's arrival awakened his old demons, and the only way he can achieve peace is by bestowing the ring, the source of his power, to the woman. He asked that she take the ring and turn what was a curse for him into a blessing for her Gabby. Tells Gigi's that he's nothing but a figment of her imagination and when she wakes up he'll disappear for good. However, the man asks how she can be sure that she isn't just his creation, and explains that sometimes the characters people create escape from them and forget that their life is an illusion. Gigi's orders the woman to read the script he wrote, and the woman finds invisible eyes at the bottom of the stack in the text the man had written. Everything that's happened since Gabby arrived at the country home when she reaches the last page. She realizes that there's no ending, and Gigi's tells her that the conclusion to the story is in her hands now, including his fate. Soon, the woman takes Dan's car and drives back to the city. Weeks later, the manager takes Gigi's on a tour of the house, because the actor plans on buying it back. When Dan asks where he's been after retiring from acting, the man says he's been in the house without being in the house, confusing Dan. The manager thinks of the former model and how the last time he saw her was the night she disfigured herself. He doesn't know where she went, but hopes she finally overcame the demons in her dreams. Meanwhile, Gagos reflects on whether he or Gabby was the actual author of their story, but believes it doesn't matter since everyone's life is nothing but an illusion. In Gabby's revision of the day at the beach with Jimmy, she tells him to stay the night at her house so he doesn't get in the accident as they're about to ride off on his scooter. The woman now wears Geiger's gold ring on her finger. Thank you for watching. See you next time.